The lady says it's recording. Here we are on The Blind Man in Black. I'm Brian Snyder. Thank you for watching on YouTube and listening on Apple Podcast. If you like the show, please rate, subscribe, and review. Also, if you like my wife and I being exhausting, go to the Exhausting Snyders on TikTok. We are going to have a new podcast called The Exhausting Snyders coming out soon, probably in the summer or fall of 2022. So keep watch on that. Now I'm really excited because it's been 17 years and I've been wanting to talk with this person for a long time, and it's wonderful to have him. He is a director, artistic producer. He is also a professor at UCLA's School of Theater, Film, and Television as a directing teacher, also professor of history of theater. Thank you so much for being here, Michael Hackett.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I'm frankly, I'm a little nervous. It's been so long. It's been
Well,
so long.
I'm nervous as well. Believe me.
well, we can relax. This is going to be fun. So, how have you been? How have you been holding up through the pandemic?
That's a very kind question, and I wanted to ask you that as well. The exciting thing is it allowed me and my wife Claire and our children Kate and Stephanie to sort of get to know each other. I mean, they didn't live here at the moment. My older daughter lives in Glendale with her husband, and my younger daughter, in the middle of the pandemic, returned from Brooklyn after 11 years. Three of the four of us did have the virus at some stage, but it wasn't pleasant, but we're fine. So
I'm relieved that you didn't have complications from it. Yeah, wow. I mean, was it? Did you have all the symptoms like the loss of taste and smell?
No, I had the opposite. For about 3 days, I had hyper smell, which
Really?
believe me, I mean, again, I don't want to make fun of this because there are so many people that have suffered from this horrible disease, but
Hmm.
I could smell a bar of soap 4 doors down, things like that. It just got to be kind of crazy, but it
That's
only went on there
intense.
about 3 or 4 days. And there was a day when there was a time 3 or 4 days in the middle of the night when I felt like little elves were taking shards and twisting them in my fingers and in my toes. So
Oh,
that pretty weird. But I think,
yeah.
as people will tell you, I think fatigue, what people call brain fog or fatigue was the worst, just trying to remember to put the right sentences in order. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that's intense. That's intense. Well, I'm relieved that you are healthy
Thank
and
you.
thriving.
And you're okay as well.
As far as I know, my family and I did not have the virus. I, and My wife did get sick at one point, but she was tested and she did not have COVID. But so far, but I mean, who knows? I mean, I guess there's another Omicron variant in the UK that is spreading, so who knows what's going to happen? But so far, we have not had the virus. But who knows what will happen in the future? But thank you for asking. You mentioned before we started, and I want to say something because this it's really important to me because we met at UCLA. I was a directing student, getting my master's degree in directing, and one of the things that I found about you that you were so uh, committed to educating and helping your students. Like, for example, one of the things that I really appreciated was, I knew you were very busy and you had many projects happening, but like at one point, you knew that I was very interested in Robert Wilson's work. And at that point, I think he had done a show at UCLA, and he was also doing one at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, and you had arranged for me to go meet him in his rehearsal process, and I was very grateful for that. And I wanted to thank you It was
Was he working, Brian, was he working at you said the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, so was it his production of Madame Butterfly possibly, or was
I
it
think so. Yeah. I mean, it was around, it was probably, I want to say 2003 maybe, or
right?
yeah. So I think it
Yes,
was
I was the artistic producer for his King Lear, which was a 2 week, I think 2 week, maybe 3 week, I think it was 2 week workshop down at Metro Media, but it was put together by UCLA Extension, and then they needed someone to produce it. And so I auditioned all of it and brought the various forces together as you would on a production. And that in itself was really interesting because it was an integration of professors from UCLA. Um, it was people from the theater community. There was an old silent film star, Ford Rainey, who played one of the three King Lears. Another Professor Tom Wheatley played one of the King Lears. There were people that were UCLA students, people from the theater department specifically. Other people were people he just found to be interesting. I remember Reza Abdo playing Cordelia with a scimitar on his head,
oh wow.
moving very slowly in a typical Wilson walk. So
So
anyway,
what year was that?
that was 85, I believe,
Wow.
1985.
Wow. So
Just
how was
after,
that experience working with him?
well, he is a unique artist. So once you say to yourself, this is not about me and my production, this is about Robert Wilson and his production, it's really exciting to be in the space with someone like that.
Yeah.
And to see the kinds of choices they make and why they're doing what they're doing, and working at that scale. He had not ever done a text, meaning of a play, a classical play. So this was his first. Before that, I think he made it all. I think almost everything he did were amalgamations of songs and pieces of poetry or things that he wrote himself.
Mhm.
So he was also aware that this was a kind of turning point in his own career, and he was preparing to then also do Parsifal. I remember we would go visit him. He was staying in the faculty, not housing, but now there's a conference center, but there was a place where you could stay, like a little mini hotel, more like a motel. And he had a whole room with his drawing board, and he was working on Parsifal for Munich or one of the German opera houses. So that was exciting as well. And to drive with him each day, one of the people who was one of his assistants, meaning someone that I brought into the team, who was an MFA director, he rode every day. He picked us up on the campus, in the sculpture garden, and we would drive down Hollywood Boulevard. Well, for Sunset Boulevard and then Hollywood Boulevard with Robert Wilson. I mean, that was an amazing thing because, he responded to all the architecture and the people on the street and the weather and the vegetation. So that was interesting as well.
So was there a moment, or was there something interesting that you had learned from speaking with him that you did not know at that point, that it was that most people wouldn't know about?
You mean about Wilson?
Yeah, or just anything in relation to him when you were, on one of the drives, for instance. Was there something that he said that that illuminated something about his character?
I didn't realize that. I learned from riding with him and hearing him speak that this place of stillness for him was very hard earned, because he came from a place of I think now we would say that he was somewhere on the learning spectrum.
Oh, so he
And
was autistic, do you think?
Yes, or
Uh,
something like that. I mean, we
mm,
now use different terms, and
mm,
but as a result, at the very beginning of his career, he spoke at Harvard,
mm,
sometimes with his head concealed, in order to discuss the the path from sort of a prosaic understanding of his daily perception and a poetic understanding, and how he sort of gathered together his forces and made this way of that he has of seeing, which is unique, um, how he made it something that was exciting for him to be
mm.
part of, you know, not something that he rejected. So that was very fascinating, of course.
Yeah.
And his sense of time is, it was, especially then in the theater, very, now there are people that copy Wilson or have a sense of time that is more Wilsonian. But I think one reason, for example, Japanese actors and other Asian actors who have studied with particular techniques that involve very extreme specificity and movement, and an ability to isolate small muscles and to be able to move them. All of that is helpful when Wilson is working, you know, to find actors who are able to work that way
Mhm.
from traditions that are like that.
Yeah, when I was in that rehearsal, it was very intense. He actually got very upset, I think, with the lighting designer, and it was very dramatic. But I, but I want to say is I deeply appreciated your efforts and your willingness to make that connection. And I always felt that you have a deep empathy and compassion for all of your students, and you're always willing to make time to talk with them, and I was always grateful for that. So
Well, you know, the best thing about UCLA is its students. They're things that, you know, it's a great institution, which is also a great super tanker.
mhm,
And it's hard sometimes to turn the super tanker in a different direction. But what has
mm,
always made it for me exciting, because the bureaucracy can wear you down, but
mhm.
what has always been amazing is the level of the students and how interesting they are. And of course, the core is always California, this unlimited number of wonderful 18-year-old Californians,
Mhm.
you know, to probably to the graduate end on the other end, like say 28, 30, you know, so we've got from 18 to 30 years old. And those are amazing students, just really exciting.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, because when I was there, so I started my master's degree in directing in 2001, and I was your TA for your it was I'm trying no, I'm trying
Theater
to think.
12, Introduction to Performance.
Yeah, and I mean, what was it? I mean, the difference between then, of course, it was in person, but now you've transitioned into virtual, and I'm assuming you're going back because things have opened up. But what is the difference, and what have you experienced between when I was there and uh, teaching virtually?
Well, you know, in some ways, teaching virtually was exciting
Hmm.
because we could be what we're doing just now, where I could I could actually pull up with the program we have on Zoom. I could pull up 49 or 50 people per page,
Hmm.
so I could see almost the whole class
Hmm.
uh, in front of me, because we usually have about 60 people in that class.
Hmm.
There were some things, of course, for the people listening to this who don't know, the class, uh, it deals with the whole idea of performance, the nature of performance, who is the performer, what is a performance, who is the audience,
Hmm.
uh, and we go to see productions at Royce Hall, not just theater, but dance pieces. And it'd be interesting. Do you remember some of the things that we saw when you went?
Yeah, I did. There was some wonderful productions, that we saw at Royce Hall, and also in the even in a little theater. I mean, there was just, I mean, that was the wonderful thing. I mean, I'm assuming it's the same way, but I mean, theater companies from all over the world go to UCLA to perform, and that I felt so privileged being there to have access to that.
So we went to see those live performances. Sometimes they come to the class, the people come to talk to the students, which is amazing because they don't realize, and that's good. They just ask questions. And sometimes, I mean, it's world level people that are, come into the class to meet the students and to say hello and to ask what they're doing and to talk about their work and to hear what the students are doing in their work. There were also games and concentration exercises. And then even more than when you were there, but definitely when you were there, we divide up now and do like 3 separate projects. A movement project. They have to do something about what it's like to be in their dorm on the first night, for example. And then they do a dream project where they act out one of their dreams. And then they create their own piece of like a 5 or 6 minute piece. They design, direct, sing, dance, choreograph, sets, lights, costumes, whatever. They're in work groups. And this is great because, our students still have to take all of the various elements of the theater. You don't just get a degree in acting or a degree in directing. You have to take at the undergrad level, but even at the grad level, you have to take a series of different disciplines. Anyway, of course, that's geared to be live, and there's nothing like being live. Yeah. But what was interesting is that it was a time of great reflection, and we are still reflecting. But specifically during that class, it had hit us just before. Meaning before that class was the fall of 19. Is that right? Fall of 19. This was so in the spring of 19 was the were the series of things that were happening socially, including, and perhaps most importantly, the Black Lives Matter movement. Those terrible killings of American citizens, Black American citizens, the Me Too movement, the whole issue of the American political scene, all of that, in a sense, could be focused by being online. Because we continued to have guests who came and they talked about what they were doing and what these things meant to them. And we were able to show immediate responses from all over the country related to what I was just speaking about. Professors came to the class because UCLA has always had a fairly diverse body of professors in theater, and there should be more. But Hane Gigama came to talk to the students, and our new lighting designer, Lapchi Chu, and it was just really exciting. Nancy Keystone came to talk about her company, Critical Mass, for example. We had Sylvan Oswald, who spoke to the students about his play and trans theater. And then these people were interwoven with guests, and I could say, here's someone from London, live from London. So that was very exciting to have that dialogue at that kind of intensity, where normally you couldn't have all those people together, in the same. Not that we always had them all hooked up at the same time, but the students had the perception that it was always, I hope, a safe place to be, in the Zoom world, and also an exciting place where you're going to hear interesting ideas. So, and they did their pieces they did their pieces that we normally used to do, that I was speaking of, where they create theatrical events with they design and sing and dance and whatever it is. And they did them online, having never met each other or one another in space. They pulled off the most amazing things as though they were in the same spaces. It was
Wow.
really exciting. And
I can imagine.
you only live once. You're only 18 once. So if Dionysus says that you have to create in a little dorm room, then you've got to do it if you want to be a creator. So they pulled it off.
That is amazing. I was as you were talking, one of the things I was thinking about is when did you start at UCLA?
Oh gosh, I began in 1979.
Now, okay, 1979. What I was thinking about is, so when I started, it was 2001. So 9/11 had happened. And I remember, that's when I first started at UCLA. And I'm just thinking about, the context of being there from 1979 till now. I mean, it must be interesting to look at a historical context of everything that has happened over the years while teaching and watching the change of the students and how they respond to historical events. I mean, that must be really interesting.
It is. It's also interesting as a teacher and a professor, the students as a body relate to you, meaning to one, depending on where you are in your own life's journey.
Mm-hmm.
So, I still go into the same room and I see myself over the sink, in the mirror when I'm washing my hands on the second floor of, McGowan Hall at UCLA. But I realized the person in the mirror looks a lot different than the one that was there 20 years ago. I feel like the same person, the same hallway, the same office. But I realize, they're relating to me like I'm a grad student. When I first arrived, I was 29.
Yeah.
They're relating to me like, I don't know, a person who's just had a child, Then I realized, oh my God, my child is now 18 and she's the same age as my freshman this year, And now I've had students who are the children of my former, of my earlier students. And now they're relating to me as someone of their grandparents' age. So that's interesting because that then becomes interwoven with the whole idea of what's happening politically, how they hear with their expectations. But equally, I find a lot of people are excited to hear what I lived through. They want to know about 1968 and what was it like to be in college, and did people really do these strange things that we've heard, and what was the living theater like? I've had people actually say, the living theater, we heard that in class. Did you ever see the living theater? And I said, yes, I did. So that's exciting as well,
Yeah, I mean, that's really just the idea of being in that place for that length of time and just watching everything change must be really just intense to think about.
And I'm not as disciplined as I should be because I love history, so I always want to tell everyone everything. Like you say, I actually knew Professor Melnitz, and he came to UCLA because he was an assistant of Max Reinhardt, who was the greatest director, from the first half of the 20th century. And Reinhardt, at his height, had something like 14 different productions opening throughout Europe and different European capitals. And so Max Reinhardt came to LA, and he created Midsummer Night's Dream and the Hollywood Bowl, which then became a film for Warner Brothers. Meaning, we're talking back in the 30s, so it had famous people of like James Cagney and Mickey Rooney and Olivia de Havilland were all in that. So, I do get excited. And I want to say, oh, well, Professor Melnitz used to meet with the students here or under that tree. This happened. And I'm sure that gets pretty boring, actually. So I have to be, somewhat disciplined about, what should we say, reining in some of those impulses. I'm
Right.
not quite as good as I should be about that.
Well, I always enjoyed your stories and appreciate them. Let's go back a little bit. Let's start at
Sure.
the beginning. So where are you from?
I was born in Washington, D.C., so was my father.
Mhm.
And so was his father. And then his father came to Baltimore, I think, when he was 4 from Ireland. So that's on my father's side.
Now,
And
were they politicians or military?
no, they were all in the military. And
Uh-huh.
they were all like my grandfather, Michael Hackett, was on a submarine in World War One. I mean, if you
Oh,
can
wow.
imagine. And then he was a chief warrant officer. So my other grandfather, my mother's father, was an officer in the trenches in World War One.
Mhm.
And we even have pictures, these tiny little rectangular pictures. I don't know
Mhm.
what kind of camera that was, but you
Mhm.
see him in the trenches. And one of my mother's aunts, one of my great aunts, drove an ambulance back and forth from Paris to the trenches, Paris to the trenches. And I really regret that I never, by the time my mind was mature enough to be interested in that, I didn't have a chance to ask her.
Mhm.
And then my father was in the Marines
Mhm.
in Korea and in World War II in Guadalcanal, actually.
Mhm.
And then after being in the Marines for so many years, he joined the army off and on. It was strange, but he also taught at a military boys' school, and you had to be on active duty.
Mhm.
So he joined the army. He transferred to the army, and then would go on and off active duty. I never understood exactly why that was the case, but he also taught at the War College, and
Ah, all right.
we weren't allowed to know what he did. So
Hmm.
I don't think it was spying. I think it's just that what he did was, I think it was troop movements and moving troops. And so you weren't allowed to know the
Mhm.
details of that. But it's
Good, good.
actually my father that got me interested in the theater. But you
That
should
was my
ask me
next
what you
question.
want to ask.
Was there an expectation to go into the military?
Never from my
Mhm.
father,
Mhm.
never. And I have 2 brothers and they never felt that either.
Mhm.
Uh, my my father really, he was a difficult character. I mean,
Mhm.
if you'd been through Guadalcanal, I
Mhm.
think we would now recognize that some of his the way he reacted to things had to do with PTSD. Or just
Mhm.
Washington D.C. is well known for its thunderstorms, and
Mhm.
he had a lot of trouble when there was thunderstorms because of all that noise, related.
Yeah.
He would sort of prowl like a panther and close all the doors. And um, but anyway, I say that because the compensation from having a, a difficult time uh, was that he loved performing arts. And so I
Mhm.
remember him taking me, I'm going like this because I think I was about 3 or 4. He took me like this and put me in front of the television and said, "Here, you have to see this."
Mhm.
And so it turned out, I've looked it up since, it was, uh, it turned out it was the Nutcracker, but it was the New York City Ballet. And he wanted me to see Maria Tallchief, who was a very famous and great ballerina, who was also happened to be a Native American. And he was really into this idea that there were people, another person he was really interested in was James Wong Howe, who equally, he would say, what would it have been like to be Chinese American or Chinese and try to break into the, you know,
Mhm.
break into the film industry, or to be a ballerina, and what was that like, and how difficult was that for her? I think he was always thinking about these things because he was an Irish American, and so um, he was drawn to these particular artists, but especially Maria Tallchief. And so, sometimes you'd come home and find him with his earphones on, and he'd be listening to Chopin or whatever. So he wasn't just anybody's Marine, but he had all these friends. I thought I would tell this story, but some of his friends were typical, what you would think of stereotypes of Marines. And when I was little, 3 or 4, one of his friends said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And this is, and I said, "I want to be a dancer." That's, of course, because my father showed me Maria Tallchief and the Nutcracker.
So that was the age that you were at when he sat you in front of the television?
Yeah, 3 or 4 or 4.
Wow. How do you remember that? Like, that must have been a very vivid memory.
Made a big impression. But anyway, the man that fellow, my father's buddy, his laugh was so, once I said I wanted to be a dancer, you can imagine his laugh was so cruel. And now you would say even mean-spirited and vulgar, that you immediately learn as a person, well, I'm not saying that again.
Yeah.
And so you start to build, even as a little kid, you start to build your own layers of protection. So people would say, "What do you want to be?" And I would say, "I want to work on the hook and ladder," which, by the way, now I frequently feel dizzy, so it probably wouldn't be a good idea, but it was that sense of height, and of what was called the hook and ladder. I have a nephew who is a firefighter, and he treats me like I'm just the most archaic person, because they, of course, don't use the term hook and ladder anymore. But anyway, I would say I want to be a firefighter. And then only with someone like my grandmother, where I felt safe, I would say, I want to be in the circus. I want to be an aerialist. So again, there's that thing of, I guess, putting on tights or something. But I have to say also, when I finally took dance, when I was in grad school, was when I first took dance, and I took it for 4 years. I refused to get into tights. So anyway, I think that the idea then that you have a Marine for a father who is proud of his sons, all two of us. My brother Peter's a director, and he was the head of the Cleveland Playhouse for 10 years.
Oh, I did not know that.
My younger brother John is an archivist. But I mean, we had this great support mentally from our father.
Now, did he defend you when that other Marine started laughing? Was he?
I don't know. I don't remember that part of it. But his defense, his defense was that he always supported us. He was, and my older daughter's a filmmaker, and he would always talk about Ida Lupino. Here again is this theme. He'd say, because she was one of the few. Dorothy Arzner was another, but Ida Lupino was one of the few directors who was a woman, in the classic Hollywood thing. And he'd say, "I love Ida Lupino."
So do you think your father had a secret desire to be like a director or being a performer?
He never said that he did. One thinks that you would be able somehow to know that, but he also did. I'm moving my hands around in circles. He prepared students to do those bayonet exhibitions. Did you ever experience those at all, where they actually hurl they stand in these perfect rows, and then they hurl the bayonets in the air almost like batons or something, and they move down the line and engage the gun exactly at the same precision. So he did that, and I think probably that was his form of theater.
So what about your mother? What did she do?
She worked at Georgetown University in administration, and I think, and in my entire life, seriously, she saw 5 films.
Oh, really?
So she would take us to, we would go out into, then the life beyond, but there was no Beltway when I was a kid, and in DC. And then, Maryland was extremely rural, as was Virginia. And we would go see the men bringing up the Chesapeake Bay crabs, fishing for the crabs. And we would see, she loved driving through the rural parts. You would see the tobacco growing and all sorts of things that you wouldn't see now, But yeah, it was like it had been, it was sort of caught in an earlier period. You'd see the corn growing, tomatoes, these vast fields of tomatoes.
Mm-hmm. Now it's probably all developed and
Yes, I'm
with
sure.
housing. Yeah. So when did you decide I am going to pursue theater? When did that happen?
Well, very, very specifically, because I did a lot of theater, but when, to answer your question, I, like many people my age, saw Peter Brook's Midsummer Night's Dream.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps by the fact that I had this really intriguing teacher, a professor at Boston College named Carol Dawes,
mm-hmm.
who was from Jamaica. And she went on to become a major, major figure in her Jamaican culture. And she died about 5 years ago. And it made me really sad, because I wanted to locate her and to thank her for what I had learned from her. And I had missed by maybe 3/4 of a year. She had died, But she said, we had a theater games class. That was a big deal then, like improvisation. And it was Viola Spolin. So it was, based on those, amongst other things. And she said, let's hire a bus, and we're all going to go see Peter Brook, because she knew Peter Brook. And she was planning to go join him in Paris to be in his center.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we all thought that was cool, but we didn't realize how amazing that actually was.
Yeah.
And so we all got on a bus from Boston to New York, which takes about 3.5 hours, I think, or 4 hours. And it was one of the coldest days I've ever experienced in my life. It just happened to be. And the Royal Shakespeare actors apparently had a thing where English actors don't want heat. They want their body heat and the light to warm them up. But we were sitting with our gloves on and our scarves and our hats, and we were pretty close to the beginning. And I remember, oh gosh, I can't remember now, but there were a couple famous New York methody people sitting on one aisle, meaning famous actors.
Mm-hmm.
Mildred Dunnick, who had been in the original Death of a Salesman, and Nina Foch were sitting there on one aisle, and we were sitting on the other aisle. And here was that magnificent, if you know about Brook's Midsummer Night's Dream, there was this, immense white box with 2 doors, and then actors could be above it looking down, and everyone ran through the box. And the forest were giant slinkies that came down on top of the people. So it simultaneously looked like an art installation, and it looked like modern art, and it was so hip and so cool. And at the same time, they spoke extraordinarily well, because they had been working with Cecily Berry, who was famous voice teacher, the voice person for the RSC. And what was people remember from that production, the swings and all of those sorts of things that were part of it. But actually what I remember was the intensity of the language, how spectacular it was, and how you really felt, even though you knew what was going to happen in Midsummer Night's Dream, you felt like you were experiencing it for the first time. So, it was a major, major, major impact on people of my generation. Sadly, in some ways later, it went on a world tour, and I saw it again in San Francisco, like 2 years later, when I was in grad school on the West Coast. And Brook had disobeyed all the rules he said you should never do. Like he cast it with people that were lookalikes, that,
Mhm.
you know, the piece slowed down and was about 20 minutes shorter. I mean, longer than it had been,
Hmm.
you know, because they had been playing in countries where people didn't understand English,
I see.
you know, because it was on a world tour. So a lot happened that was disappointing, given that, you know, many of us were Brook um, worshipers at that time. And when you're 19, let me tell you, that was an amazing piece to be able to attend. And I've never found the reference again. I needed to write it down, but there is a book someone wrote about the impact that Midsummer Night's Dream had on a number of people in what I keep saying, in my generation of theater goers, you know, because as it said, I was 19 when I saw that.
So you were at Boston College, right?
I
When
was
you
at
saw.
BC, and then
Now, was your major, what was your major at that time?
English and psych, but I never finished the psych part of it. But it
Hmm.
was really this professor, Carol Dawes. It was riding back on the bus that a number of us were elated, as I
Hmm.
was, that we saw such a remarkable thing. We knew it was remarkable.
Hmm.
And then that was like on a Saturday, you know, that we came back. I think it was a Saturday.
Hmm.
And then on Sunday morning, I couldn't get out of my bed. I mean, seriously, it was like I was ill, but I wasn't ill, but I was ill.
Hmm.
And Monday, I couldn't go to classes. I literally, it was like, I don't know how to describe it. You know, it's like my body didn't have the proper weight in it.
Hmm.
And or it was like some weird form of love sickness or something. I
Hmm.
honestly don't know. And then it got into like the second day, and my roommate, who had been my roommate for 2 years by then,
Hmm.
said, you know, you snap out of it. And but that was really my turning point. I realized that what I was going through is that I was shedding. Probably I was tearing. You know when we hear that Reagan said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall," right?
Hmm.
I think what happened is that trip and Professor Dawes, and then that production took like a giant wrecking ball to the walls uh, I had erected since I was 3 or 4 with my life in the Marine Corps.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, I thought, I never thought, well, I can do this or I can't do this. I just thought I'm doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm going to, I'm going to, well, first of all, I thought I have to go to the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Hmm.
That was my insane notion. I would have been
Hmm.
19. And
Hmm.
the frustrating but not bad thing is that I did go to the Royal Shakespeare Company,
Hmm.
but and it was to observe Peter Brook's production of Antony and Cleopatra, that was to have Glenda Jackson and uh, Alan Howard. At the time, I mean, they were major folks. And by the time I got there with my wife Claire, who could I had just gotten married, and we got there so that I could observe these rehearsals, and I don't know what I would be doing. There was a strike, and um, there was no production. It was canceled.
Oh no.
Yes, but at least I got there. Uh, but I mean, this would be a whole nother story. But when I got there, I realized this was meant to happen.
Hmm.
Instead, I went to the Royal Exchange Theater and worked on a production of uh, Uncle Vanya,
Hmm.
and I was able to observe it, and the detail of going, you know, point by point by point by point through this great psychological, um, poetic play. And uh, And then I realized that what I was seeking, that I had seen in New York, wasn't there anymore. Of course, it was in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Not only specifically Peter Brook, but the theater I really wanted to do
Mm-hmm.
was more not just European, but specifically not British, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another story. You know, the Olympic Arts Festival was part of it. To see something like 36 productions in 6 weeks from all over the world was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And you know, some people, I mean, you know, in the US, we think of the Brits as being so different than we are doing theater, and we talk about the British theater tradition, the American theater tradition, but I don't think it's all that far apart in many
Mm-hmm.
ways. I think the greatness of American and British theater is really
Mm-hmm.
characterization, you know, magnificent acting, different techniques for acting, but magnificent acting, and it's very actor centric.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not in any way saying that the actor shouldn't be at the center of a play, but I'm just saying that there are other cultures that treat the director or view the actor as more like a poet of the theater,
Mm-hmm.
where you're controlling more elements or integrating more elements and less dominated by the actor's process alone.
Mm-hmm.
Or
So
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I was to say, or even dominated by any of the elements, because there are, you know, kinds of theater where the playwright dominates or the designers dominate. But
Yeah.
there's also a tradition of theater in other countries around the world, in Africa and Asia, in Europe, where the work of theater is a more inclusive, poetic, ritual experience.
Mm-hmm.
So
what I wanted to learn though was, when you saw Midsummer Night's Dream, what was your first impulse? Were you like, I want to be an actor, I want to be a director? What? Because you mentioned dancing before.
absolutely, I want to direct this.
I see. Okay.
And also my impulse was because I hated Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
by you know, when I was by 19, I had seen so many bad productions.
Mm-hmm.
And what seems terrific about this is that it was so alive.
Mm-hmm.
So what Brook was great at, you know, as a director, was to be able to make these, like surgery, just these, you know, a cut, and the whole scene would make sense.
Mm-hmm.
The greatest directors that I've admired, like Patrice Chéreau in France, you know, I saw his production of Phaedra, and she
Mm-hmm.
comes out and she says, "Oh, I'm overwhelmed by love, and my body is burning in desire." And she says, "You know, I can't contain any longer. Even my jewelry is weighing me down." And she ripped off her earrings and threw them to the floor and ripped off her necklace. But it was, quote unquote, real within the context. Someone else might read that and not even connect to their ear. You know what I mean? Their
Mm-hmm.
ear, they would just take it as a metaphor. My jewelry is heavy or something.
Mm-hmm.
And what's great about great directors is they infuse those moments with meaning, often with very little. You know,
Mm-hmm.
she just rips off her earring and you go, wow, that's amazing. So that's what Brook, I wanted to be able to use theater with that kind of clarity to tell these stories, you know.
Mm-hmm. So there was not an impulse. You're like, you know, like for instance, like I started out as an actor and I went to Cal Arts, and that's where I started out, and I wanted to be an actor. And then I had these issues with my vision loss and I shifted towards directing, and that's how you met me. And so it was always directing. That was always the impulse from Midsummer Night's Dream.
I see what you meant then. Well, yes. So there's a whole nother narrative here,
Hmm.
which is from the time I was a child, they say like 6, I was
Hmm.
in the men and the boys choir,
Hmm.
and it was for church.
Hmm.
And at that time, especially, or at least the church that we were in, because I was raised as a Roman Catholic, it was highly, highly theatrical in a
Hmm.
kind of austere way, but very, very theatrical. And so we were singing, a good dose of Irish hymns, but we were also singing things by Mozart and Palestrina and Bach and these sorts of things that we sang. And then the ritual itself, I mean, for example, before Easter, which, is, it sort of corresponds, not from a Jewish viewpoint, but from a Christian viewpoint, taking the tradition of the Passover,
Hmm.
um, uh, because Jesus was at the Passover when he was arrested.
Hmm.
Um, for the 6 weeks leading up to Easter, um, you could only sing in plain chant, or you could sing on one line, but you couldn't sing in harmony. I mean, in the
Hmm.
most extreme, because you're waiting for Easter to do this again. All the statues were covered. All the artworks were covered. They were covered in these drapes, so you couldn't see any of this stuff. And then on that night, there was like a sort of like across the temple, there was, this veil, and behind it were all the flowers, hundreds of flowers of, lilies and hyacinths and narcissus. You can imagine, because I was
Hmm.
also an altar boy as well as, uh, as well as a singer. And uh, at midnight, I can't imagine what the neighbors thought who weren't Catholic, but they would ring the bells, and then but there'd be these handbells they would ring, and then they'd ring the bells in the church, at midnight, ding dong, and then they would go from darkness in the room to light, candle by candle. People would light the candle, so it would go from darkness to light, and then they would pull back this veil, and they would show all the candles lit on the altar. Well, these are ancient practices that go back to the early Christianity, which they had then gotten from the Romans and from from Judaism.
Hmm.
So you're talking about ancient things, like what Jesus would sing, and he'd say, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. And then he would die on the cross. When he died on the cross, they would hit a wooden block. It would just pierce. It was piercing.
Hmm.
And well, eminently theatrical, in the sense that I would say that the visceral, sensual aspects of these things, combine to tell the story with really, I mean, with visceral feeling. So that was the other half, that I've always been a singer,
Hmm.
kind of singer musician. And that's why I'm attracted to people like Robert Wilson, because and he'll tell you that he got into what he does because Rodgers and Hammerstein were so influential to him, where you had this kind of theater that was singing and dancing and acting. And I would say that's probably as well, because we all listened to musicals, and I would get presents from my aunts, like a $5 bill. My great aunt, I told you, that was in the trenches, and I'd buy a new album. Or I learned also the liberation of being. I had a friend, Jimmy. I was interested. It was interesting because I was listening to your interview of Mel Shapiro, and he talked about getting some friends together and going on the subway from Brooklyn, and they would buy a ticket for $1.80 or something.
Hmm.
Well, I did as well. I mean, I wish we had a subway up, but DC was not a very exciting place for theater, let me tell you, in the 50s and 60s. But I learned how to put my money together, my savings, my allowance, and my money from presents, and I could actually buy tickets with my friend Jimmy, and we would go. We were theater pals, and we would go. We had a system we would sit in the second balcony, but never the first row, because that would block, the head would but anyway, I'm rambling, I'm sorry, but
no, it's all right, go ahead.
Music has always been a key thing. I mean, now since I knew you, I've lectured a lot on opera at the LA Opera and other places. And so musicals, opera, contemporary experimental stuff that integrates dance and music and movement. That was the other influence. So, it wasn't just, oh boy, I want to be in the theater. It was specifically, I want to do things that, combine poetry and movement and dance and
yeah, and I felt like that was all a part of not only, I've seen, I remember at the Getty, you had a production, a reading, and I remember, in class. And so you always amalgamated dance and music into every aspect of it.
Yes.
And I appreciated it. I thought it was.
Do you remember what that was that you saw at the Getty?
It was a stage reading, I think.
Right.
But my memory is not the best these days. But
whose is? COVID time is bewildering to me. I can't remember whether I did things before or after other things. So.
but yeah, I mean, I always appreciated that you always incorporated music and dance, and the other thing is, I really believe that all of the students loved it. They were all having fun in your class. I mean, they really were. I mean, that was the beautiful thing about your class that I TA'd for, was that everybody was excited and wanted to be there, and they enjoyed your energy and your excitement for theater.
Well, I am excited. Theater is a wonderful thing, and also it's a serious thing. Meaning and you know what? The more fun it is, and the more joyous it is, in a sense, the more serious you have to be to pull it off. Because otherwise, it could just look like a bunch of us romping around.
Yeah.
But it's been very rewarding to teach at UCLA, because UCLA does, in fact, accept creative work as equal to publication. And that's very important in the hierarchy of professorship and in promotion. And it also says that we feel that the activity of doing theater is as important as doing physics, or whatever it might be. But even in that context, there have been times when I have found that the arts are misunderstood, sometimes willfully misunderstood, by certain administrators in the university. At other times, amazing support from people from other disciplines. We had a remarkable vice provost, Judah Smith, who was and still is a great patron of the arts, and you really felt supported by her. But it can be tough, and so I think anyone who's an artist on campus also has to be an advocate for the arts. All the arts.
Yeah.
Because you don't have the same critical mass that, let's say, the engineers have. There are a lot of engineers and engineer professors.
So, after Boston College, did you go directly to Stanford, or
I went directly, which seems insane now, but I did. And I was there 4 years taking classes. But the fourth year was preparing, for
your dissertation.
Right on my dissertation.
Yeah.
And then we moved to London, and Claire worked at the Victoria and Albert in the British Theatre Museum, where they had merged the British Theatre Museum with the collection in the Victoria and Albert. And I worked at LAMDA, ostensibly teaching, but I also actually went to class, the voice classes, and joined up with. So it was an interesting thing to be at LAMDA, to see,
For those listening and watching, can you what is that acronym?
Oh, LAMDA, I'm sorry, is the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art.
Great.
And it's the oldest theater school in England.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very familiar with it. And so what was that experience like?
Well, it was really interesting because we spent most of our life with English people or British people.
Mhm.
And we really learned. I think people were very generous. I mean, there are people, I suppose, in any walk of life. There were some folks that just didn't particularly want to work with Americans, but
Mhm.
in general, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience, because we got to work in the actual, each in our own way, in the administration of the entity that we were in, and they included me in all sorts of things that they wanted me to see. So the head of LAMDA at that time was named Michael Barry, and he had been the head of the Irish BBC. I believe it was the Irish BBC or the Northern BBC. But anyway, he said, you have to see the auditions. I want you to see the auditions, and I want you to be there at the certain stages, like the callbacks and then the final auditions and those sorts of things. And they let me vote and do all of that. And I actually, when we returned, I actually did auditions for LAMDA a couple times on the West Coast. And they still, even after all of these years, although now, there are very few people that would have known us, but they treat you like you're part of a family. So that's exciting to still have those contacts.
Did you explore your Irish roots at all when you're over there?
It's funny you say that, because I've just been discussing that with Claire about what we should do about that. Both of our Irish, I have English ancestors as well, and she has Scottish, and we sort of went in those directions. I don't know why, but so we really do need to learn about that, because it's a wonderful culture and wonderful theater culture.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So I mean, you mentioned Midsummer Night's Dream. So what are some of your productions that early on, especially that you were like, this is why I do this? Like when I was at UCLA, my production that I enjoyed the process and the outcome the most was Metamorphosis and Kafka's Metamorphosis.
yes, and I remember that. And you were, I remember there was someone sort of up in the ceiling, wasn't there, sort of hanging?
Yeah. Gregor Samsa was crawling up the walls,
Yes.
and there was we had designed this kind of netting so he could climb up the walls.
Yes, I remember. So that was in 1340, or what?
Little theater.
The Little Theater.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so what production like early on that you were like, this is why I do this? What was that production?
This is why I do this.
Right.
Well, again, in grad school too, in many ways, your thesis, you're thinking out what you're doing, or you get one or two chances when you're in grad school. So I worked on the Tempest. I love the late plays of Shakespeare. And so that was it's a play filled with riches, and it never stops sort of revealing itself. So I think that was, it sort of told me all the things that I needed to learn. But in a good way, miraculously things sort of came together and fit, and the pieces all fit together. So I think that was important, and that's before I went to London. And then, the thing that was amazing about being at LAMDA is that they were in class all their first year. The second year, they were in class for the half the day, and then they were in plays for the second half. And then the third year, they were in plays only, and then you would have like certain speech coaches or movement coaches, etc. So the second year was the intriguing year, as I said, because you'd have technique classes all morning, and then you'd have rehearsals all afternoon till about 6 o'clock. So I directed 2 shows a day. I mean, 2 shows. I directed 2 shows each quarter. They would divide it. So 2, 2, and 2. So like 6 shows, and then the next year 6 shows. So I did 12 shows in 2 years, because there were other breaks and I went other places and things. But that was really even more important than any one show. It was to have to really think on my feet, know how to do research, what is important, what isn't important, what can I use the rehearsal to learn about, how can I give a very precise instruction, how can I help actors and not hinder actors, because when you're working quickly like that, the tendency is to impose things. So I guess what I'm saying is that more than any one play, it was that experience of doing that many things at once.
And how did they respond to you at LAMDA? Did they, as an American, did they?
Very, very well in general, I think people treat Americans still very kindly. I'm not sure we always deserve it when we're traveling in other countries.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But
yeah, I do.
People like American culture. I mean, what was sort of funny is that I was doing Greek plays, and to a lesser extent Shakespeare, because that's what I wanted to do. And then they said, well, you're an American, so it's great that you're doing the Greek plays, but we want you to do something American. And I said, I don't want to do an American play.
Yeah, you
said,
didn't want to do Arthur Miller.
And I said, I don't want to do it. And he said, you have to do it. And finally I said, all right, I'm going to do View from the Bridge, because it's like a Greek tragedy.
I was in it. Yeah.
And then you've done.
Yeah, I played a small character in that. Yeah, I think it's.
Well, of course, it's a great play.
Yeah.
And I did it, and they all said, it's so American. It's so psychological.
Yeah.
And, quite frankly, I didn't discuss psychology at all. I directed the way I normally directed, but that was a revelation, because a lot of what influenced me was contemporary dance at that time. And then I realized, of course, it comes from a period of, like, Martha Graham, when they're doing their expressive movement, it's like doing an internal monologue. It's the same period of psychological theater. So I got more of a sense of humor about myself. And then I went on and I did Eugene O'Neill's Sea plays. They were terrific to do with people who weren't American. That was exciting. And, they had the voice coaches, more than one, to help them do the different accents. And they turned it on its head, and they made the Irish person speak with speak with the Scottish person. The Scottish person had to speak, with the American accent. The American had to speak with the Cornish accent. That was great. That was also, I think another thing I learned being in an academy is that they saw it as a craft. I mean, they knew that there were artists, there were certain, Judi Dench or someone like that, who took her craft to the level of artistry, but that it's a craft. And I appreciated how they did not intervene with a student psychologically, but they would say, oh, this person, he's really tall and he's gained about 3 inches in the last year. And he's not in his body. So no one then met with him and did a psychological analysis on whether he's in his body or not. The fight teacher said, I'm taking your épée away from you, and now you have to use a broadsword. So it was, and someone else said, we're going to cast him as Theseus, because he's got to embrace his bigness on stage, not just physical bigness, but his actor's bigness. And so they talked about it in ways like that, where they analyzed what was necessary. I really appreciated that, because in the most extreme forms of American acting, it's turned into a kind of ersatz, or traditionally was. I mean, that's dying out now, but in the most extreme American psychological tradition, that sort of analysis was turned into something that was psychiatric or psychological, when we're not trained to be psychiatrists.
So what I'm hearing is at LAMDA, what they would do is they take an actor and give the person a specific type of role in which they believe that they could live up to. Is that
or inhabit? Yes,
Yeah.
or that would also be helpful. Yes.
Rather than saying, well, you need to do this, and work through this, so you need to, overcome this issue, or
Right.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah. Very interesting. So what happened after LAMDA?
What happened after LAMDA? Well, it seems almost extraordinary, but I received a letter at LAMDA asking if I was interested in applying to UCLA. And they were having a search, and my chair at Stanford had sent a list of people he was recommending. And so they were involved in a search, and I flew from London. Ironically, there was a guy there on his junior year abroad from UCLA school. Well, we weren't then, with the Department of Theater, Film, and Television. So I had a class, and I saw him there, and I said, I'll say hi to UCLA for you. I had never been to UCLA. And I got on a plane, and then got off. And I think the next morning had my interview, and that night I flew back. My brother and sister-in-law were living here at the time, so I had a place to stay. And I received I received an invitation to teach at UCLA. And I said to one of our former students, it was my first year, it was a person named Michael Schlitt, who said, how long are you going to be here? And I said, you can roll over me with a steamroller or something if I'm here more than 5 years. Because I wasn't sure I wanted to be a Southern Californian. It didn't. Now I love living in LA. It's just it's such an exciting place. But I was probably being an idiot, East Coast person who had lived in London. So I was probably being an idiot. And now I realize how great it is living in Los Angeles, what a privilege it is. But anyway, I said, well, if I'm here for 5 years, you can roll over me, with this steamroller, or throw me out. Or so whenever he sees me, he jokes about that. So I've been here that long. Yes.
Now, how did you meet Claire? Were you
she was in The Tempest. She played Miranda in The Tempest. So she was a junior. Yeah, I think a junior when we first met, and I was in my second year of grad school. So.
And was it love at first sight, or did it develop over the production?
It wasn't love at first sight, except when I first saw her, I thought, this is really interesting person. I mean, I'm sure that happens. And we happened to like, it sounds weird, but her mother had danced in the summer programs headed by Martha Graham. And she was at Mills College, and there was a famous composer, one of a group called The Six, Les Six, Darius Milhaud, Milhaud. And I gave a talk in her design class, Claire's design class, that she was taking. I gave a talk about mood and music and color. And I played some examples of Darius Milhaud. And this is pretty weird, but her mother had known Mio in class. And so she had grown up hearing Mio music. This is fairly, not obscure exactly, but this is fairly unusual that two people would in the same place would both really love this somewhat unknown composer.
Mhm.
And so I think that was our hook. We realized, oh, maybe this is what's drawing us together.
Mm. Wow. And now has she stayed in the theater, or where did she go
Uh,
from the Tempest?
she worked, first of all, as I told you, in the archives,
Mm.
the theater history archives, but then has worked for like 20, she just retired and worked for about 25 years, first in the Beverly Hills school system and then at Marymount, which is across the street from UCLA.
All right.
And she was the head of performing arts and also the head of the theater program. And yes, so she's a director and um, directed a lot of plays. And
So how did having a family inform your artistic process? Did it
that's a
change
great
it?
that's a great question. And I know you have a son, right? You have a
Yes, I
little.
do. Yeah.
How old is?
He'll be 7
Oh,
in April.
great.
Yeah.
Well, I think what it meant, the one I love. I'll just say this: I love Jacobean plays, which are those sort of bizarre, horrifying plays that come after the period of Queen Elizabeth.
Mhm.
But once I had Gurren, I stopped liking those. I thought that they were. I realized how cruel they were in many ways and
Mhm.
misogynistic, and so I struck those from my repertoire.
Mhm.
But more generally, the way I'd answer the question is that um, it made me, in a pleasurable way, think about how I wanted to impart theater, and to how to hear this wonderful creature that's been born, and what's the first music that they hear,
Mhm.
for example. And that's a great privilege and honor, or what's the first dance you want to do with them?
Mm.
What are you going to do? Are you going to be in 3/4 time or 4/4 time? Are you going to be
Mm.
in waltz rhythm, or are you going to be in foxtrot rhythm? So I think it made me, um, it helped me to listen more, because I was trying to experience what they were experiencing, you know.
Mhm.
And I took them, at a quite young age, well, really young. I mean, when they were 6 months old, we would take them to art galleries and things like that. But um, when they were 3, they came to UCLA and they would see rehearsals and watch the lights, etc. I mean,
Mhm.
there's some things I, wouldn't let them see
Mhm.
that were too emotionally violent or something like that. But
Mhm.
we, in general, didn't censor theater. And when I lived in Poland, we all lived in Warsaw in 91, 92, and they saw extraordinary actors, some of the great actors of the world.
Mhm.
And they saw, some very challenging theater. And I thought, well, the choice between not letting them see it and letting them see it, let's err in the direction of letting them see it.
Mhm. And
So
how did that go?
uh, very well, I think.
Mm. Did they talk about it to this day?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And
And
how did they respond to it?
well, we've always, as a family, we always would analyze things,
Mm.
like driving home in the car or wherever we were. So we'd say, what do you think they were doing with the lights? Or so
Mm.
unfortunately, these poor children were getting a Theater 12 class. And I used to teach, you probably don't know this, but a history of the American musical class that Gary Gardner later took over.
All right. Yeah.
One of our beloved professors, as you know.
And he
Uh,
passed away a few years ago, didn't he?
he did, yes.
Yeah.
He was an amazing person, and he should have really been teaching it, because from the beginning, because he knew, he was one of those people that really had all of the details. But I had them come with me for the summer. I taught the summer class, and they took my class.
Mhm.
And I think my younger daughter took it without a pal or a friend, but my older daughter had a friend come as well, and they had to learn, all the things that had to be memorized. They took the test and everything. That was when they were about 12, maybe.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah, yeah, that is amazing. So are your children, are they, I think you mentioned that one of them is in film, or
One is in film. Her
uh
name is Kate Hackett,
okay.
and she was one of the editors on Cheer. So we're proud of her because 2 years ago she won an Emmy, which
Oh,
seemed like
wow.
a surreal uh, experience,
Yeah.
in the middle of the COVID time. But yes, so she's an editor, and our younger daughter is getting a doctorate in art history. So
So they're,
California art, by the way. But
wow. Wow, that's amazing. So they all stayed in the arts. That's beautiful. That's a
yes,
testament to your influence.
I think, and Claire's influence, and I again, like my father being so supportive. And by the way, my mother wasn't not supportive. It's just that she didn't know anything about it. She never. She said to me once, "You talk so much. Why don't you become a lawyer?" Meaning you're so good at talking, because I think she said, and let theater be your avocation. And I
Mhm.
said, well, I don't know. I really know what I want to do. So
Yeah.
she was never obstructive. It's just that she didn't really know. But later on, when my brother was also at Denver, he was the associate director of the Denver Theater Center,
Mhm.
and I was doing a workshop, a Greek workshop. He invited me to come, and we were doing choruses, and she got to see me, doing choruses, which was great. Um, and my brother had a show on at the same time, so they got to see back to back these two events. So that was exciting.
So, I mean, your brother, I mean, that's wonderful that you had that support that's, from each other. Was it always, I bet, were you always influencing each other, or was it,
I I don't we didn't see that much of each other's work, but it's
mm,
interesting. When I did see a piece that he directed, he was responsible for all the new plays in Denver, and
mhm,
I saw this play that he directed, and I thought, that looks like I directed it. I
mhm,
mean, meaning the actors did things that looked very similar to what I would have asked them to do,
mhm.
certain distinctive movements or things like that. And then I thought, that's really unusual.
Did you
But
talk to your brother about that?
yeah, then we did. We didn't have an answer for it completely.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
I,
So, uh, what are the productions that you're most proud of, that you think about, like, I'm really happy that I was able to do that and experience that?
well, my first two pieces in Warsaw
Mhm.
were, I think, it was just after the Iron Curtain had fallen. So it's very poignant even to speak about this now,
Mhm.
as it's possible that Poland could be pulled back into a war.
Mhm.
But I did Metamorphosis, my own adaptation. That was before Julie, not Julie, Zimmerman's uh, adaptation existed.
Mhm.
Um, so I did 9 tales or stories from Ovid's Metamorphosis. And I had done something similar when I was at LAMDA with a composer named Richard Blackford. But in this case, I did all the music except part of it. The opening part was composed by a Polish composer. And I did the movement and the sort of ritual aspect of it. And I hadn't, it hadn't occurred to me. Well, for one thing, parts of Metamorphosis by Ovid had never been translated into Polish
Mhm.
because they were considered either too violent or too erotic
Mhm.
And so to go from Latin then into Polish at that time, because whatever reasons, that in itself was a new thing, to be able to hear this classical text, but fully translated, or at least the parts we were using.
Mhm.
And then in addition, it hadn't occurred to me how poignant or meaningful it would be to a Pole to do a play called Metamorphoses, plural,
Mhm.
because the country was in this incredible change.
Mhm.
So to be doing something, a piece about flowers that become people, and people that become animals, and animals that become, trees, and that it's constantly changing. And also a kind of relief maybe that people had that that we weren't just when I say we, meaning the project wasn't just some sort of Yankee celebrate. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I don't know that they knew what to expect from an American doing Ovid's Metamorphosis.
Mhm.
But then to complicate it, the next thing I did was an evening of songs of George and Ira Gershwin,
Mhm.
the two brothers and we sort of created a frame for it, but basically it was like a series of cabarets, cabaret acts.
Mhm.
And the Poles embraced that music and sang it and performed it from their perspective. And so it was very clearly American, but at the same time, it didn't sound like anything you would ever expect American to do, because there was a sense of sadness in it, which
Mhm.
actually is in Gershwin. In some Gershwin, there's this wistfulness and kind of sadness and a sense of something.
Someone to watch over me,
Yeah,
kind of
is
like.
a good example.
Yeah.
So those two pieces in Warsaw, which were both running simultaneously, that was very exciting for me. And I felt very privileged to be able to represent American culture in a sense, but to also have a dialogue with these very extraordinary Polish actors, who would make it their own. They
Mhm.
made it their own.
Yeah, that sounds intense. Especially during that time period. So, I mean, I want to ask two questions.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So, as an educator, from when you started teaching at UCLA, and you said 1978 or 9?
9, yes.
Yeah. So from when you started, what has changed the most from when you started? What transformation within you has
Within
changed?
me.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I hope my students would say this and my colleagues, but you never know. Uh, I really truly feel I had this when I was younger, and the way I was, I guess, schooled or something. I had this idea, that this is the right way to do this,
Mhm.
and I hope I'm a more supportive person now, of that there isn't really one right way to do anything.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and that the way you can be supportive is by helping the student reach their vision, to arrive at what they are trying to achieve, rather than trying to tell them what it should look like or something.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So I think that's been a process. And I realize that if an act, let's say a director is working with an actor, if an actor is sometimes nervous or scared, I think it's because they don't understand what they're doing, that the director hasn't made it clear. So
Mhm.
they don't understand it, or I guess, or they're frightened.
Mhm.
And So rather than blaming that on an actor, I blame that on myself now, that I haven't made it clear or made it safe enough. But yeah, Mark Twain is right that that what is it? Youth is wasted on the young. Wasn't that his? I wish now I could go back and be more patient. Maybe that's what.
Well, I will say this, when I was there at UCLA from 2001 to 2004, I felt that you did exactly what you set out to do, which is to create a safe space to create. And I felt that you were immensely supportive of my work. And I always felt like you were always present, and you did listen, deeply listened.
Well, I
And
certainly remember, I I remember that we had a number of really interesting talks in my office where you would just come to visit and we would talk about things. I've always enjoyed that part of teaching. That's like the free benefit on the side, is we're not only talking about Kafka, but we're also talking about Robert Wilson. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I remember I remember I had to do something on Jean Genet, and I remember us talking about Jean Genet, and
well, because I think about that time, didn't a really important biography come out on Jean Genet? I think
it was I think it I don't know.
Edmund, is it Edmund White?
Yeah. And I that was part of my assignment, was to read that, and that was fascinating. And then I ended up doing The Balcony as my thesis production. And
and that was when was that? That was the spring of.
That was 2004. So I graduated in 2004, and I don't know if you were able to see my conversation with Jose Luis Valenzuela, but
no, I didn't.
But I had a lot of regret, and because Metamorphosis, I felt was successful. It did well, and I enjoyed the process. But The Balcony, and I remember my conversation with Michael Hackett. Michael McLean. Yeah. Sorry. And McLean, he allowed me to do that production, but I think he was worried about it, and he was rightfully so. I think that production had always failed to some degree.
Well, it's a very difficult piece. Doesn't Mel Shapiro say that in his interview, that it's a very difficult play?
Yeah. And I felt like I was going for a type of aesthetic, which was very closely related to Robert Wilson. And but I felt that I did not. I failed with the actors to some degree, and I was not happy with the outcome, and I didn't invite anybody to see it. And then I felt very disheartened when it was over, because I felt like I failed in so many ways, not only the actors but myself. But Jose Luis was very loving about it, and talked about it as the process. And I think I was very strict with myself about it. And
we probably should say that Jose Luis is the head of the LA Theater Center.
Yes. Yeah. And
a professor for many years at UCLA and in the School of Theater, Film, and Television.
Yeah. And he was very loving, and talked about, because I think what it was is, in my mind, I wanted it to be the showcase for moving forward, with my life in the theater. And I felt like I had failed to some degree. And so it was very difficult. And I don't think well, the other aspect of it is at that same time, my eyesight had diminished. It had changed. And so I was going through that simultaneously. So I was having a realization that I will not have the eyesight needed to do this work. And at least in the way I thought I had to do it, in an ableist type of way.
Right.
And what I should have done is just done it differently. But so, but my point is in all of this is that I always felt that you had created a very safe and loving space, and joyous as well. There was always so
Thank
much
you.
joy in every interaction that I felt everyone had with you. I mean, that's the wonderful thing that I felt that, and I'm so happy that you're still there. So that
Yes, still alive. Yes.
that what I mean is what I
No,
mean
I
is
know
still
what you mean.
at UCLA.
Of course.
So students will um be exposed to that joy, and that
Well,
yeah,
history is, all of us, have had to endure history classes that are just so dry. And
yeah,
so it makes me sad sometimes because theater history is so interesting,
yeah.
but everybody's got their own passion. But I love reading about the vampire trap, for
Mm,
example, how that worked. It's from the 19th century, and it's how they made the vampires come through the walls with these special trapdoors, or come through the floor.
mhm.
So I love reading about this, or flooding the Colosseum like the Romans did. Can you
Ah, yeah,
imagine? And putting full ships in the middle of the Colosseum to have sea battles. It
yeah.
just is. It's just the most amazing sorts of things, really. And so anyway, it's easy to be joyous when it's something that is fun. It's fun to
Well,
read about.
I feel like that's what you relayed to us, a sense of joy in the process, because Michael McLean and we got in some arguments. Like literally there was, I think we had to have like an intervention, and I don't even remember what it was about. I remember like who was the dean at that time? Oh, I don't remember his name. But anyway, we had to have like this mediated meeting. And I think it was, maybe I was being stubborn, and I don't remember what it was, but it was about, probably about it was around deciding on my production for the second year, which became Metamorphosis. Um, but I just, what I'm just trying to say is that it's interesting, the different experiences from professor to professor. And I want to say with you, I just, I always felt a sense of joy, of the learning process itself and the creative process, which helped feel at ease and at peace. And I think you created that, and it's obvious because based on what you said about, not imposing an idea or an aesthetic or whatever on a particular project. And
Have
I
you
always,
ever have you ever thought of doing any acting now? I mean, I know you were doing stand up, or testing yourself in stand up.
yeah, well, what happened was, is, I did, what happened was, is after UCLA, I got really scared, because I didn't know what I was going to do, because I was told, um, I learned about that I had this condition called Usher syndrome, which causes blindness and deafness. I learned that I actually had it when I was at my first year at Cal Arts.
Mm.
So when I was diagnosed, I was told that I would have useful vision into my 50s. So I'm thinking I'll be able to drive, read normal print, and so on. And so when I was at Cal Arts, and I had this experience where I was cast in a Richard Foreman project at Cal
Oh,
Arts,
you talked about that with Mel. Yes, that's
and I was, I was on stage for the first rehearsal, and I remember there was a spotlight at like eye level from the audience, and I remember he was having us run around, and I felt very scared that I was going to injure somebody, if I didn't see them, because I was blinded by the light, and I quit. And I know that I feel like that if I actually asked somebody who is connected to Richard Foreman, I said, I'd like to send him an email and like talk to him and say, I am sorry, but because I just dropped out. I didn't explain why. And I regret that. And
I think you should contact him, Brian. I heard your story. You told a more detailed, when in the Mel Shapiro interview, and it seemed to me like a logical thing to do because it's something that still you're living with, and you don't feel like it's complete. The story is complete. And what can he really do? I mean, he can either accept it or not. You know what I
yeah,
mean? But
yeah,
you at least get to tell the story.
yeah, I wanted to apologize because I didn't explain that I was going blind, and that I was scared, and that I didn't, I was in denial,
Well, you don't have
and
anything to apologize for, but it might be a mysterious thing that he would remember or not remember. But I think it'd be completely appropriate for you to contact him.
yeah, yeah, I'm actually, it's funny, I'm in the process of doing that, and but to answer your question, I feel like I've made some mistakes in my life, but I think and I'm living with it, the regret of not, and it was from an ableist kind of thinking that I had to do it a very specific way. And what I should have done is just embrace my disability and done it differently.
But
And
can't you still do it? I mean, you're a comparatively young person.
I'm,
So
I'm, I'm, that's what I'm attempting to do. Stand up is really, something that I love to do, and I've always wanted to do it. And so I feel like I'm starting over, because there's as from being a director and performer, that, um, you have to stay in practice. Even this interview, it's been a couple of weeks since I've done a conversation, and I'm like, I feel rusty. You know what I mean? I feel, so that I'm trying to, that's what I'm doing right now, is rebuilding myself as a performer, and while also trying to adapt to this loss of, eyesight. I'm right now, I'm in the worst stage where I'm letting go of the very little remaining eyesight that I have, and embracing, um, my other senses, because that's all I have.
Mhm.
And so, yes, thank you for asking that question. And that's what I'm doing now, about with doing stand up, and I also, I have a master's degree in directing, and I did not do any teaching because I didn't feel like I was worthy of doing so, because
actually you
yeah,
have a Master of Fine Arts. So
yeah,
uh, it's an even higher degree than an
yeah.
MA. Yeah.
So that's where I'm at, and I thank you for asking that. And I'm trying to become a performer again, but it's I feel like I'm starting all over, basically. So, which is a interesting place to be at 43 years old.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
for sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you. So the other question in relation to what I was going to ask is, how have you changed from when you started and sat in front of that television and watched the Nutcracker as a performer or artist in the theater to now? What has transformed the most?
Um, I don't think anything has changed in a strange way. In a strange way, um, of course, I mean, technique has changed. I uh, I also realize I've been directing for 51 years. And
Mhm.
that's if you count when I was 21 and I did my first play. But I really have been directing since I was 6 or 7, because
Mhm.
I was in something called the Children's Theater of Washington and worked on things. And the spirit, um, I guess what's changed is that the spirit is still there from when I was 3 or 4 and saw those amazing things for the first time. But it's much easier to access that now.
Mhm.
You know, uh, maybe that's from constant repetition
Mhm.
of working in the theater, and of, I've been able to do small things and large things, academic things and professional things. Um, I think accessing that spirit of wonderment or something that used to be, that used to feel to me a strange thing, even when it was an exciting thing. But now it feels like it feels like every day, something interesting happens, and it's exciting. Um, I don't know. I don't think I'm being coherent.
No. I mean, when you were saying that, what I gathered was that, that's what my thought was that wonderment, that's what you bring to your work as an educator,
You
and
know,
as an artist is,
everybody's got it.
yeah.
That's the thing. And I mean, I'm grateful for you for saying that. But everybody has the capacity um, to live. I don't mean like we're stupidly happy or something. The world is horrifying,
Mhm.
and you've got a young child.
Mhm.
So, but that joyous state is part of being human, and we don't let it reign as much as we should. um, yeah, I think, as I said, that has become much easier to access. I just finished a production with our third year graduate students, who were joined by, there were 8 grads joined by 8 undergrads. And it was just really exciting to be with that age range of people, um, from freshmen, uh, being, some of them had never been on a stage as large as the Froude Playhouse. We actually built a theater in the round on the stage.
Mhm.
It's so big.
Yeah. Yeah.
But some were there for the first time, excited to be in a space. Uh, One of the grad students was excited because she was playing a leading role, and was pulling like the quarterback, or was the motor for the production, and that
Mhm.
was exciting. And it just is really fun to come every night and to have that to look forward to.
Mhm. Wow.
So
So how do you see theater? I mean, what is your change from how you saw theater when you started, from how you see its purpose now, the importance of it specifically?
well, when I was talking about this transition I made from England to beyond,
Mhm.
um, it's just that I have these wonderful memories of things like
Mhm.
seeing Sir John Gielgud and Vivian Leigh and Ivanov by Chekhov,
Mhm.
and I remember seeing what you would call sort of what Mel Shapiro called boulevard theater, meaning
Mhm.
as you're walking on the great boulevards of Paris or London, and you say, or Broadway, and you say, let's go see these plays.
Mhm.
And there's something wonderful about the energy of Broadway that's nowhere else in the entire world. And it's exciting, but it's not really what I'm interested in personally, in the same way that there are people that, aren't interested in Polish theater or something like
Mhm.
that. I understand that. But I've more and more, since that Olympic Arts Festival and living in Poland and having done 5 productions there, um, I'm I'm much less interested in the entertainment aspect of theater. That doesn't mean theater isn't entertaining. Absolutely, every single theater piece should be entertaining. If it's not entertaining, who wants to sit through it? But
Yeah.
what I mean is, my major concern is not that it's going to be entertaining first of all. I think more important is that for me is that it's this, as I said, that it's a kind of living work of art, a three-dimensional work of art. A play is a poetic presentation of the world in 4 dimensions. So that's definitely changed or evolved. Because when I say I saw Sir John Gielgud and Vivien Leigh, that was the absolute best. That, I mean, was something wonderful. It was spectacular. Those great, to see Judi Dench and Ian McKellen, or to see Angela Lansbury. My God, it was just amazing. And Sweeney Todd, to see that. And I'm not going to say no. I don't want to see that. I just mean that there is even more complex and layered. There are even more complex and layered experiences to be had. I'm not saying I reject that. I'm just saying there's more that I want to see now.
So what is next? What are your next projects though? What do you want to do like from here on out?
Well, I get 2 answers. One is I've been working for the last 5 years on a project called Diversifying the Classics with Professor Barbara Fuchs she's from Spanish and Portuguese and also from English, and I think Comp Lit. And she's an expert in Shakespeare and Cervantes. And she, with a group of grad students over the last 5 years, have been translating plays by major playwrights like Calderón de la Barca, Lope de Vega, Sor Juana, who is a Mexican mystic nun. She's been doing translations of plays that have never been translated into English. These major plays. So I've been working with her in that each year, our first year MFA students have done a 10-day to 14-day workshop where we do a dramatic reading. And now there's a big festival of stuff. More and more their work is being attracting interest. And so I'm going to be doing 3 scenes from a piece called The Courage to Right a Woman's Wrong, where, whatever you call it now, videoing it, recording it so they can go on their website. So that's my immediate thing. I have to do that in the next 10 weeks. And what's interesting is this piece of Courage to Right a Woman's Wrongs is by a woman named Anna Caro, a female playwright. She was enslaved in the Christian context. She was Islamic, and she somehow became adopted by a Christian family, and she learned classical languages of Greek and Latin and other contemporary languages, and she supported herself writing poetry and writing plays. So you can imagine people are very interested in Anna Caro. So I'm working on that. And then I'm hoping to create a contemporary chorus. I've worked on choruses so long, primarily Greek, but also Aztec, and over the years I did Viking choruses, and so anyway, I want to create a contemporary chorus called American Dithyramb. The dithyramb was the choral structure, and I wanted to have 3 parts and call it American Dithyramb, and the central part would be on solitary confinement. And the other 2 parts, I'm not quite sure yet, but I think one would be on the state of the trees, the burning tree, the redwoods. So I'm thinking it through. There's a group in Poland called Kobieta, which means girl, but it's a chorus of women. You can hear them online on YouTube, and they chant and sing, but it's contemporary stuff. that they're talking about, and it's really interesting. And they use the format of a chorus. So
Wow.
so that's what I think I want to work on now.
Well, I'm grateful that you're continuing working, and I'm so happy that you're at UCLA, and students will have an opportunity to be within your presence. So is there anything that you would like to discuss before we close out? Is there something that you'd like to share?
Well, having watched, I've told you about Peter Brook and Midsummer Night's Dream. That was astonishing, truly astonishing. I think that I would just share also when I was, I think, 14, and I saw Fiddler on a Roof. That was staggering. It was on its way to Broadway. It had like 2 weeks to go before its Broadway opening, I think.
Was that with Zero Mostel?
This was with Zero Mostel.
Yeah.
And Jerome Robbins' choreography and direction were astonishing. I mean, just, it's still in my mind as what is great about American theater. I mean, now that I've gone off on this riff about wanting to get off the boulevard, I think where it's great like that to have a choreographer at that level, you know, who was at the New York City Ballet, but also choreographed West Side Story. I mean, that sort of American sense of pride in contemporary popular culture to integrate classical as well as contemporary culture was very, very exciting. And to see Fiddler on a Roof with the kind of energy that it had, and that integration of music and dance and story and poetry, was just overwhelming. I think it was one of my greatest influences, along with the Peter Brook Midsummer Night's Dream.
It's amazing how one production can change one's life. I know Robert Wilson's Wojciech was that was for me. That changed everything. How
I can understand.
You know,
I've seen it. I didn't see it live. I've seen it on, you know, on the screen. On I don't know how I saw it.
With Tom Waits' well, it was at UCLA when I was there, and it was Tom Waits' music.
Yes.
And it was just, it was so powerful. I mean, it just, I mean, it was overwhelming. And like your experience where you said after Midsummer Night's Dream, Peter Brooks's version, it stayed with you. And the same thing with me. I could not stop thinking about it. And that's the testament of how powerful theater is. It can change one's life in such a profound way.
Right. I agree with you. Absolutely.
And I'm just so honored that we could have this conversation, because it obviously means a lot to both of us. And now before we close out, I always ask, I'm starting to ask, or I've been asking these questions just to see how people respond. And I'm going to ask you these two questions. One is, if you had an omnipotent voice and you could speak to everyone on earth, every living creature in their own language, what would you say?
I would say, you know, protect one another and protect nature at this point.
Thank you. What would your epitaph be?
Oh gosh. I think it's Heraclitus. I love this. He says, "Panta re, all things flow." I think I think theater is about what's exciting about theater is that it's constant forming and then creating new form, you know, destroying the old form, creating the new form. It's constantly, there's always that energy there, but everything is flowing. You know what I mean? So for just a moment, you capture something and it's called the Tempest, Stanford 1976, and then or 5, and then it disappears. And then you capture something, Pericles, UCLA 2022, for you just can pin it down for 10 performances and then it disappears. That's why I say protect each other and protect nature, because they're the vehicles for this energy.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't protect one another, the energy will leave us. We have to have a place for it to be. But that's the great, it's like, you know, the Buddhists that do sand paintings all day and then do these beautiful paintings, and then they mess up all the sand.
The mandala is wiped away. Yeah.
Our play is the mandala.
Yeah.
And we have to buy into the notion. If you're doing theater, I'm not talking about film and I'm not talking about video or television, I'm talking about theater. Theater is about the process of creating and destroying and creating and destroying and creating and destroying and creating and destroying and creating. And that's why everyone should always be in their strikes. I always say to the students, do the strike, help clean up afterwards, partake in the ritual. You've got to destroy the forms so that new forms can grow.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael Hackett.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
Yeah,
we should have lunch.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm hoping to visit LA soon. Yeah, I will definitely love to reconnect with you. And I wanted to give my wife a tour of UCLA and just kind of show her where
It'd be great to meet. No, so where am I from? Whence are you speaking if you're not in LA? Where are you?
I live in I don't know if you know where Nevada City is.
Well, on a map, yes.
Yeah, so it's you know, northeast of Sacramento, about an hour and a half, you know, and it's in between, you know, Sacramento and Reno, like if you're going 80. And so that's where I live.
All right. Well, I'll look it up again, but I've been to Nevada City.
Yeah. So I was born here, and it's odd that I've returned here because I thought I would stay in LA or be somewhere else, but you know how life is.
Yes.
You know, had I not moved back here, I would not have met my wife and my stepson, and so it's been a wonderful experience, and I'm so grateful that I'm here to be able to have this conversation.
Well, best wishes. Thank you for interviewing me. It was fun to think about all these things.
Yes, thank you. And
like
it's
my father and Maria Tall Chief in the Marines. It's great.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening on Apple Podcasts and watching on YouTube. This is The Blind Man in Black. And if you like my wife and I being exhausting, go to the Exhausting Sniders on TikTok. And that new podcast, The Exhausting Sniders, will be out soon. And once again, thank you for sharing what is alive within you, Michael Hackett. Deeply appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Now we're going to have our awkward ending. Here we go. All right.